My son told me he would come tomorrow, if he could, when I was in the ICU begging for help. My name is Helen Cartwright, 73 years old, a widow. No one calls me mom anymore. People often ask, how can a mother turn her back on the child she once cradled and cared for? I don't answer, not because I don't know what to say, but because some pains only grow colder the more you try to explain them. I used to believe that if I loved hard enough, sacrificed long enough, I'd be allowed to stay, that the things I gave would be cherished. But kindness given to the wrong people only makes it easier for them to forget you were ever there, especially when they needed you most. I'm not telling this story to be pitied, and I'm not looking for anyone to take my side. I'm sharing it because if you've ever sat quietly in your own home and suddenly realized you no longer have a place in someone else's life, maybe you'll want to listen. And if you haven't, then stay, because I'm about to tell you. Sometimes it only takes one phone call to remind you exactly where you stand in someone's heart. The afternoon in Middlebury was colder than usual. Wind swept through the narrow streets, heavy with the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke. Inside, I stood by the kitchen window, my dry hand pressed against the chilled glass. Outside, the neighbors had already strung up their Thanksgiving lights. Tiny bulbs flickered dimly through the early winter fog, their glow lost in the pale gray of the sky. My kitchen looked the same as every other year. A pot of chicken soup simmered on the stove. The familiar scent of broth and dill filled the air, an old comfort no one remembered anymore. I set 2 place settings on the small table by the window. One for me, one for Derek. I don't know why I still do that. Maybe it's habit, or maybe it's because last year, on my birthday, Derek sent me a single clipped message. Happy birthday, Mom. No call, no visit. Just one line colder than the November wind. I looked at the plates and wondered if I should put one away, but I didn't. Somehow, it felt like a quiet way of holding on to something long gone. The soup bubbled softly. I turned off the stove and ladled it into 2 bowls. The chicken was tender. The greens floated gently on top. I set the bowl down in front of me, phone in hand. Derek's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long time before finally pressing call. 1 ring, 2, 3, 5. Just when I thought I'd be sent to voicemail, his voice came through, bright rushed. Hey, Mom. I swallowed hard. Derek, I made some soup. Thought you said you'd drop by this week. I heard a vague laugh on the other end, then the sound of a crowd. He was somewhere busy. Oh yeah, Mom. We got caught up today. Katie made dinner plans with some friends, and it wouldn't be polite to cancel. I'll swing by. Maybe tomorrow if I'm free. I gripped the phone tighter. If I'm free. Those words brushed past my ears like a cold draft. You go ahead and eat. Don't wait up. You know how things are this time of year. We're slammed. His voice seemed lighter after he said it. Before I could reply, he added, Tomorrow, Mom, and hung up. I set the phone down on the table. Not hard, no sound, but I felt the weight of it fall inside me. The soup still steamed in front of me, delicate swirls rising like they didn't yet know they were supposed to fade. I took a deep breath and reached for the bowl. Pain spread across my chest, sharp and quiet, climbing from my heart to my shoulder. A dull ache I'd grown used to, unseen, unspoken, and unimportant. I walked slowly toward the table, the bowl suddenly heavier. The floor beneath me felt cold through everything. Halfway there, my hand trembled. My fingers slipped. The bowl dropped, a muffled cracking sound. Hot soup splashed out streaking the old tiles, soaking into the faded flannel of my sleep pants. Too fast to catch. The pain surged again, this time, unmistakable. My chest tightened. The world tilted. I fell, my cheek landing against the icy floor. My eyes stayed open. No sound but the wind through the doorframe, and the slow boil of soup going dry on the stove. I moved, one arm reaching. My fingers touched the hard edge of my phone. I pulled it close, pressed 911. The ring buzzed like a lifeline in the stillness. I spoke my address in a hoarse whisper. The voice on the other end confirmed. I tried to stay calm, to stay awake. The pain didn't ease, but I wouldn't let it own me. I thought of Derek, of the way he hung up quick and casual, like I was just one more thing to push aside. Outside, the wind picked up. Dry leaves scraped along the porch. I stayed where I was, the tick of the clock growing louder. I could almost hear myself coming undone, slow, quiet, with no one to see. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, not long. In the distance, I heard the siren, sharp, urgent. It split through the thick quiet, like a blade, closer, louder. I didn't move. Lying there on the cold kitchen floor, I listened to the siren and the sound of my heart breaking. I closed my eyes again, and in that blurry moment, I thought maybe it's time I learn how to exist again, in a way I never had before, on my own. Some promises aren't meant to be kept. They're just made to delay the hurt. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the light, harsh white unblinking, and the cold. It came from the floor, from the thin blanket draped over me, from the empty air all around. The smell of antiseptic hung thick in the room. Familiar. It pulled me back to the days I used to bring Derek to the hospital, when he had those high fevers, and there was no one else to care for him. I turned my head. Beyond the curtain on the other side of the room lay an elderly man, motionless, in his hospital bed. Beside him stood 3 people, a silver-haired woman holding his hand, a young man adjusting his blanket, and a little child perched on a chair legs, swinging eyes fixed on the man asleep before them. I watched them like a painting, a family, a presence. No words were spoken, but none were needed. Just being there was enough. I turned away, glanced down at my own hands, lying small against the white bedsheet. Veins, visible freckles scattered. These hands once soothed Derek through long nights of fever. They brought him bowls of soup in bed, tied his shoelaces, wrote excuse notes when he missed school. Now there was only me, and the cold. I heard soft footsteps. A young nurse appeared, her hair neatly tied back, her face hidden behind a mask. She glanced at the chart, then at me. "You're awake," she said gently. "I'm Emma. I'll be looking after you today." I nodded, lips cracked and dry. Emma checked the monitors, adjusted the IV. Her movements were quick practiced. When she leaned in, I could see her eyes, the eyes of someone used to seeing pain, knowing all she could do was soften its edges. "Do you have someone we can call?" she asked softly, as if afraid the question might bruise. I looked at her, then past her at the window. My face faintly reflected in the glass, aged worn, caught between the sterile white light and the night outside. Derek hadn't called. No message. Not even a question. I remembered the winters when I wrapped Derek's tiny wrists in wool scarves, pulled a thick, fur-lined hat over his ears, and walked him to the park down the street. When he slipped on the ice, I'd run to him, brushing snow from his knees, whispering comfort. When he was sick, I sat awake all night beside him, replacing cold cloths on his forehead, counting each labored breath. On his 12th birthday, I made a chocolate cream cake. He took one bite, then ran off to play with his friends. When he went off to college, my birthday became just another text. "Happy birthday, Mom." Emma was still waiting. I pressed my lips together and shook my head. "No need to call anyone," I whispered. She didn't press, just made a note, then slipped out her steps, careful, as if afraid to disturb the loneliness in the room. I closed my eyes, letting the overhead lights dissolve into the red behind my lids. Outside, the sky had gone dark. Wind lashed the windows. Tree branches tapped the glass. The heart monitor beeped in steady rhythm, mechanical and impersonal. I lay there, letting the past settle over me. Each breath stirred another memory, like waves too tired to crash. Derek at 16, asking to sleep over at a friend's. Derek at 27, calling to say he'd proposed to Katie without ever asking what I thought. The missed Mother's Days, the hollow phone calls, the promises to visit that vanished like wind. The sharp scent of disinfectant filled the room. I opened my eyes, stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds outside my door, rolling wheels, quiet voices of nurses working the night shift. The cold had sunk into my muscles, but I didn't shiver. I was used to it, used to carrying everything alone, even the silence. Beyond the curtain, the man still slept. The child had dozed off, head resting on their mother's shoulder. The young man still held the old man's hand, never letting go. I looked at them, then back at the space beside me. A knock on the door. Emma peeked in her expression, unchanged. "Ms. Helen," she said gently, "we'll need to list a family contact for your records. Someone to pick you up when you're discharged." I met her gaze. 1 second. 2. I didn't think. I just offered a faint smile, dry and brittle like an old branch stripped bare. "I don't think there's anyone," I said. Emma nodded. No pity, no unnecessary comfort, just quiet understanding. She stepped out again, leaving me with the humming machines, the wind outside, and the stillness. I closed my eyes. Tears spilling not from pain, but from clarity. I lay still, letting the light surround me, letting the darkness fill the cracks in my heart. And when I opened my eyes again, I knew no one was coming. I would have to walk myself home. And so I did. Alone, back to the place I used to call home. Sometimes the deepest pain isn't when someone leaves. It's realizing they never really showed up at all. I came home, alone to a house that no one was waiting in. The door creaked open, and the cold entered before I did. I stood at the threshold for a moment, looking into the dark kitchen. The air smelled faintly of leftover food and damp corners. No lights, no welcome. I hung up my coat, slipped off my shoes. My thin socks brushed against the cold wooden floor. Streetlight filtered through the curtain in faint streaks, laying long shadows across the ground. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it. The soup pot still sat on the stove, the bottom crusted with dried broth, bits of chicken darkened and shriveled. Nearby, a plate of apple pie had hardened, the cinnamon scent muted and cold. I stepped forward, touched the plate. My fingers trembled just slightly. I could still hear Derek's voice echoing in my mind. "I'm just busy, Mom. Busy." A small word, clean, enough to gather all my waiting into one fist and crush it. I exhaled slowly, then started gathering the unused plates and bowls, dropping them one by one into the trash. Each movement was quiet, deliberate, like laying to rest a part of my old self. Even the broken bowl from that night, I'd wrapped in old newspaper and laid carefully at the bottom of the bin, just like I used to teach Derek to put away his toys. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out. A missed call from an unknown number, probably the hospital admin office, or someone trying to confirm a detail I no longer cared about. I silenced it. Then I slid my thumb to Do Not Disturb and turned it on for the first time ever. No more calls from anyone. I poured myself a cup of black tea and sat down in the old folding chair by the window, my hands wrapped around the ceramic, the warmth easing the cold that seeped through the window pane. Outside, Middlebury was dressed in Thanksgiving lights. Stores had hung their Black Friday signs. The corner cafe had its windows full of orange and gold balloons. Elderly couples strolled hand in hand across the street. Children ran past their scarves, wrapped tight around their flushed faces. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. I rose to answer. There stood Gloria Blake, a warm smile on her face, a foil-covered plate in her hands. Her knitted coat was as bright as the kindness in her eyes. "Hi, Helen," she said. "I made some pumpkin bread today. Thought you might like a slice." I took the plate, felt its gentle warmth through the foil. "Got any plans for Thanksgiving?" she asked, eyes hopeful. "We're gathering at my place like always. Just a small get-together. You're more than welcome." "Really?" I looked at her, at the sincerity, the unspoken generosity, the faint scent of spiced pumpkin wafted up between us. I could imagine her kitchen broth simmering on the stove, laughter in the background, soft yellow light over the table. A year ago, I would have said yes without thinking. But today, I shook my head. "No thank you, Gloria," I said softly. "I've got something to take care of this year." No surprise, no hurt, just a nod, and her warm hand briefly resting on mine. "Well, if you change your mind, my door's always open," she said, and turned to go, her small frame disappearing into the glow of the street. I closed the door behind her, leaned back against the wood, my hand brushing the edge of my coat. The phone lay quiet on the windowsill. I picked it up, scrolled, until I found the name Douglas Finley. The dial tone echoed in the silence. He picked up after 2 rings. Mrs. Cartwright, his voice calm and professional. "I'd like to make some changes," I said. My voice was firmer than I expected. "To the will?" he asked. "To everything," I replied. "The will, the accounts, the inheritance. I want to schedule an appointment." He cleared his throat. "I have an opening next Wednesday." "Good," I said. "Wednesday." We hung up after a few short confirmations. No small talk, no pleasantries. Just the way I needed it. I set the phone down. This silence didn't feel heavy. It felt still. In the corner of the room on the old bookshelf sat a worn, brown address book, a relic from a time when every number, every name was written by hand. Friends, family, people I once called dear. I picked it up, flipped through the pages. Each name brought a quiet nod. Names that no longer called, no longer asked, only reached out when they needed something repaid in time or patience. I took the book and stepped out into the backyard. The sky was dark, no moon. Wind twisted the dry leaves into soft spirals. I lit a fire in the old metal barrel where we used to toast marshmallows when Derek was little. One by one, I tore out pages and fed them to the flames. Each name flared bright for a moment, then turned to ash. No ceremony, no tears, just quiet and resolve. I watched the smoke rise, curling up into the cold sky. Names, memories, all drifting into silence. I closed that chapter, and I would never open it again. Some doors once closed are never meant to open again. The next day, the town buzzed with the start of the holiday season, while I stayed still behind a door I no longer opened. Fog clung thick over the yard, wrapping itself around the bare bushes in front of my house. The porch light cast a pale, yellow glow, patchy, like oil on water. Farther down the street, other homes had begun to light up. I saw silhouettes moving tables, being set turkeys, pumpkin pies shining plates. The warm hum of Thanksgiving was in the air, but it didn't reach my doorstep. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The heat had slipped away, leaving behind a thin, pale brew that reflected the porch light like dull glass. Through the blurred pane, I saw two figures approaching. One, tall, walking slowly. The other wobbling slightly in high heels, draped in a bulky winter coat. Derek and Melissa, his new wife. I didn't move. The knock came first, soft, then louder. A voice followed, trying too hard to sound cheerful. "Mom." "Open up. We came to visit." I set the teacup down, quietly, without a sound. Outside, Derek's voice shifted more apologetic now. "Mom, you know how busy I've been. End of year's tough. So many projects. It's not that I didn't want to come." I leaned my head back against the chair, eyes drifting to the lawn, covered in dead leaves, listening to his words like an old, worn-out song. I remembered the time I'd asked Derek to take me to the hospital last year. My back had seized so badly I couldn't walk. He hesitated, mumbled, then passed the call to Melissa. It ended with a dry message. "I'm swamped, Mom. Let Melissa figure something out." The early winter wind picked up, sending the leaves tumbling in swirling piles across the porch. Then, Melissa's voice cut through sharp and cold as sleet. "Mom, we were thinking maybe a nursing home would be better for you. They know what they're doing. It's closer to us, too easier to stop by. Easier." I stood up slowly, walked toward the door. No sound. My hand touched the doorknob, the metal cold against my skin. I cracked the door just enough for them to see me. An old pajama white hair, pinned back, eyes still, and cold. I didn't say a word. I simply raised my hand. In it was a small sign, handwritten in thick black ink, "No visitors." "Thank you." I hung it in full view directly in front of them. I caught Derek's gaze. Those dark eyes I used to know, now blinking surprised, uncertain. Melissa stood behind him, lips pressed tight. Her eyes narrowed with irritation. Before either could speak, I gently closed the door. No force, no noise, just a quiet click. Through the wood, I heard the muffled sound of flowers dropping onto the step. I didn't open the door again. I didn't need to see. A long silence followed, then the sound of Derek's slow steps, Melissa's heels clacking beside him as they walked away. Just before they reached the street, Melissa's voice cut through one last time, sharp as a blade. "You'll regret this." Inside, I stood still, my back to the door, letting those words pass through me like smoke. No more knocks, no more calls. The clock ticked slowly on the wall behind me, measuring the quiet in shallow breaths. Outside, the neighbors' homes glowed with golden lights, the soft clinking of cutlery and warm laughter spilling onto the street. I picked up my cold tea and settled back into the old chair by the window. Through the fogged glass, I watched their figures shrink at the end of the street, small shadows swallowed by the mist, until they disappeared altogether, like they'd never really been there at all. I took a sip of bitter cold tea. No flinch, no frown, just a calm, quiet finality. Some doors once closed are never meant to open again. As their footsteps faded, I stayed where I was. No more trembling, no more hoping. I understood this time I had shut the last door to the past, and I wasn't waiting for anyone to knock again. I spent the days that followed clearing out the dust of memory. I used to think I couldn't live without them, but silence taught me I never needed anyone at all. The house was still like it had never known laughter or the sound of little feet pounding across the wooden floor. I stood in the middle of the living room, my hand resting on an old picture frame hung on the wall. In the photo, Derek was 5, sun-bleached hair, wide grin running into my arms. That clumsy, full-body hug only a child gives, believing his mother's embrace is the safest place in the world. I took the picture down from the nail, gently wiped the thick dust clinging to the wooden frame. Then I placed it in a wide cardboard box lined with old newspaper. One by one, I took down the photos, the certificates, the messy childhood drawings, cleaned them, and packed them away. No rush, no drama. Just steady, even movements, like breathing. The kitchen held no scent of soup or cinnamon, no sound of running water, no clatter of knives and plates, just the empty air of dinners never made. I stepped into the storage room. Dim light filtered through the door, and dust hovered in the air. Old things stacked in corners. Derek's rusted bicycle boxes of toys from preschool days, a crate of textbooks I had saved, hoping one day he might want them back. I opened each box, sorted them, piece by piece. Sell, donate, toss. The rusted bike sell. The half-missing Lego set donate. The yellowed school books straight into the trash. No hesitation, no emotion. I wiped my hands on my pants, feeling the dust cling to the fabric. Then I paused, looking down at my hands, veined, freckled, once thin, from carrying burdens that were never mine to hold. I shook them off as if brushing away the last of it. Dusk fell quickly. I changed into clean clothes, wrapped a light scarf around my neck, picked up my handbag, and locked the front door behind me. Maple Diner was 2 blocks away. I walked slowly past streets lined with dry leaves, past lit windows, past families gathered around tables ready for Thanksgiving. Maple Cafe nestled quietly on the corner, golden light spilling from the windows, the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods drifting out. Douglas Finley was already seated, charcoal suit, neat briefcase on the table. He looked up and nodded when he saw me. I sat down without ordering anything. He slid a stack of documents toward me. "Give this one last look," he said, calmly, not rushing. I picked up the pen. My eyes moved down the densely printed lines, each one a confirmation. Removing Derek from the will, canceling all inheritance rights, transferring the entirety of my assets, the house, the savings, the possessions, into a private trust, to be donated to the causes I would choose in time. I didn't shake. I didn't waver. I signed. The pen moved easily across the paper. Helen Cartwright, legal and sole owner. Douglas gathered the documents and placed them neatly into his briefcase. "I'll have everything finalized by the end of the week," he said. I nodded. Thank you. No small talk. No pleasantries. Just business. Exactly how I wanted it. When I stood to leave, my steps felt lighter. The cold air wrapped around me, but I could breathe more easily, as if I had just shrugged off a heavy coat I'd worn too long. Back home, I turned the key and opened the door. Streetlight spilled in, casting long shadows across the floor. In that dim light, I saw a figure at the door. Gloria. She held up a small box. Apple pie. She smiled. Thought you might need something sweet. I invited her in. She placed the box on the counter, removed her scarf, her kind eyes glinting softly. No questions. No long conversations. She simply sat across from me. It's time to start living for yourself, Helen, she said. We've given enough. I smiled. A small one. Natural, unforced. We drank tea in silence. Gloria cut a slice of pie and slid it toward me. I took a bite. The crust was crisp, the filling warm, laced with cinnamon. Not the best I'd ever had, but warm enough to soften something inside me. She left when night had fully settled in. I stood on the porch, watching her silhouette fade into the fog my heart light. Inside, I looked one last time at the box of old photos. Memories, yes, but no longer chains. No one could take them away, but no one could force me to keep them either. I bent down, placed the lid on the box, and closed it. No tears, no regret. I had signed it. Helen Cartwright, legal and sole owner. When Gloria's figure disappeared behind the white fence, I stood there, cup of cold tea still in hand, and I knew it was time to plant something. Not for anyone else, but for me. The next morning, I began with a single seed. He texted, "I don't even know who you are anymore." I just smiled, because for the first time in my life, I'm learning that too. Afternoon in Middlebury wore a soft silver gray. Thin clouds veiled the weak sunlight just enough to keep the backyard from turning bitter cold. I stood there, fingers gripping the handle of a small spade, my foot pressing into the loose soil, where I dug a shallow hole right beside the old weathered fence. A young apple tree waited in a pot, its roots wrapped in damp earth. I lifted it gently and set it in place, then began covering the base with soil. Each motion was slow, deliberate, like laying down a promise. It wasn't my first time planting something, but it was the first time I was planting it for me. I brushed the dirt from my palms, the gritty texture catching on dry fingertips. A breeze tugged at the edges of my coat. The wind carried a chill, but it didn't bite. I stood there, looking at the thin, crooked tree. Its fragile branches shivered in the cold, small but unbroken. I thought maybe I was the same. The gate creaked open behind me. I turned. Gloria Blake stepped into the yard, holding a small tin. Her usual knitted coat and wine-colored scarf wrapped gently around her. "Got any tea?" She called out, a smile lifting the corners of her mouth. I nodded and opened the door for her. We headed into the kitchen where the kettle had just begun to hum. She popped the tin open, revealing a pile of golden brown cookies, warm with the smell of butter and cinnamon. She slid the tin toward me. "Baked them myself. Try one." I broke one in half. The scent was soft and full, and it spread into the room like a kind memory. We sat down at the table. Gloria poured tea into 2 old porcelain mugs, ones I'd kept even though the rims were chipped. "What are you doing for Christmas?" she asked, her eyes squinting slightly behind her glasses. I smiled. A real one, unforced. "I think I'll buy myself a new oven," I said, "and cook a nice dinner, just for me." Gloria nodded pleased. Good. About time you did something for yourself. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth seep through me. My phone buzzed beside me. A familiar name lit up the screen, Derek. I picked it up. The message read, "If you keep this up, we'll cut you off completely." I stared at the words. My hand didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. Just calm. Clear. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. I slid my finger across the screen and tapped delete. The message vanished, as if it had never existed. I turned back to my tea, to Gloria, to the scent of cinnamon cookies, to the little tree still trembling in the wind outside. Evening settled in. Shadows crept into the corners of the house. Gloria left just as the porch lights down the street flickered on. I walked her to the door, watched as her figure faded past the white fence, soft and blurred in the mist. Back inside, I flipped on the porch light, casting a soft golden halo onto the damp steps. Not to welcome anyone in, but to light the way for myself. I sank into the faded armchair. By the window, the fabric worn and familiar. Beside me, an open book lay on a small table, its pages curling gently under the lamp. I reached for my little leather notebook and pen. In slow, careful strokes, the blue ink soaked into the page. Welcome home, Helen. Outside the window, the young apple tree swayed in the wind. I watched the porch light glow over the cold, wet ground, and thought finally I had learned to be my own light. No explanation needed, no more words. I propped my feet up on the opposite chair, took a long breath in, and let it go slowly. Outside the window, the apple tree moved gently in the wind. Its shadow stretched across the earth. Night came, and the porch light stayed on, not to wait for someone, but to shine for me. Under the porch light, I began learning how to love myself, slowly, quietly, like planting a tree in the coldest part of winter. I used to believe sacrifice was love, but I've come to see that if you don't honor yourself, even those closest to you might one day walk away. Kindness isn't always returned, but dignity must never be surrendered. Like the porch light that no longer waits for anyone, it now shines for the one who once stood quietly in the dark.